My guest today is Chris Hooper, who at the time we recorded was the CEO of Accodex. Recently, Accodex has gone into liquidation, but I thought it was still important to have this interview shown because the entrepreneurial roller coaster is real. And when this interview was done, Chris was really at a high and now not so high. So I think that for anyone listening or watching, it's great to understand that being an entrepreneur seems like it's an amazing journey, but while you're living it, it can feel like the highs are really high and the lows are really low. And at the moment, Chris is really low. So shout out to you, Chris. We're here for you if you need us. Welcome to Season 2 of Accountants on Purpose. It's brought to you by the University of Adelaide's Think Lab. Think you've got what it takes to be a great entrepreneur? Do you want to learn from the best and have a roadmap for success? Register now for Think Sprint, an opportunity brought to you by the University of Adelaide's startup incubator, Think Lab. Test your skills in their 90-day sprint and learn the habits of highly successful entrepreneurs with weekly coaching, workshops and day passes for Think Lab Adelaide. Move your startup forward with confidence. No interviews and no applications. Simply register and you're good to go. This is your sliding doors moment. Will you choose to sprint? Joining me on the show today is Chris Hooper.
Well, this is fun. You know, we're making good money. Life's good. Life's pretty easy. What do you want to do? Do you want to do this for the next 30 years or do you want to swing for the fences?
He is an accounting futurist who believes accountants can change the world.
I kind of got to this point, you know, in my late 20s where I'm like, if I can do this consistently, over time, at scale, and make business and investment decisions based on my theories about the future of just the accounting profession, then I'm going to make a lot of money.
What I wanted to know is, what does that mean? So I invited him on to chat.
Here's literally everything that you need to know, and what you need to do and how you need to do it, if you want to succeed in this profession.
Chris Hooper is passionate about helping small business owners. He runs freelance accounting platform Accodex. He was one of South Australia's inaugural top 40 under 40 business leaders last year, and I'm really looking forward to interviewing him today.
Hi, my name's Chris Hooper. I'm the CEO of Accodex, and I'm looking forward to hanging out with Sarah on the Accountants on Purpose podcast today.
Hi, I'm Sarah Bartholomew's from YouLegal. The Accountants on Purpose podcast showcases inspiring accountants who are leaders in their field.
And then it just came to me like a bolt of blue.
What makes them tick?
Love it.
How did they get to where they are? I want to inspire. And what do they do now for their teams, their clients, and the world? Known as an accounting futurist, Chris Hooper is the CEO of Accodex and he's on a mission to change accounting forever. He believes that accountants have the ability to change the world, but they just don't know it yet. Accodex is a platform for freelance accountants, and Chris is passionately leading the way for small businesses to power their future. Chris is highly accomplished business leader, named as one of the top 40 under 40 this time last year, and he's got other accolades as well to prove it. So my first question for you, Chris, is imagine you're driving in the car alone. What song is pumping?
Look, I'm going to say Prince Ali from Aladdin. I've been big into Disney lately.
Have you seen the new Aladdin?
I haven't seen the movie,
God,
no spoilers. No spoilers.
Oh.
But yeah, I was a huge fan of that movie as a kid growing up. Like, so my wife Katie has been like unpacking the meaning of Aladdin for me.
Okay.
So I was a big fan of like that movie in particular, right? And you know, because Katie's doing psychology, she's big about unpacking meaning,
I bet.
right?
And psychoanalyzing you.
Correct. And my fixation on that movie in particular, and she says it's because Aladdin is a rags to riches story that I latched onto that.
I also latched onto onto that.
And like, you know, the song in particular, Prince Ali, where it's, you know, he's like marching through Agrabah and it's like all of the pomp and ceremony.
Yeah.
So like, I don't know, for whatever reason. And this was like from, you know, age 7 upward. It's like that song always used to get me hyped and it still does.
I was more into I Can Show You the World.
That's fair.
Yeah.
I get it. Different reasons.
I know. I'm going to have to ask Katie what it means.
What that means.
No.
Well, was that your favorite Disney movie growing up? It was. There you go.
I know.
Okay.
She's going to have a field day.
Yeah.
What's the celebrity persona that resonates with you and could possibly be your alter ego? You can't say Aladdin.
No, of course not. Well, you know, either fictional or not, I would say Iron Man / Robert Downey Jr. Like, I think the actor himself and then also the character that he plays in that series of films. I think that was a pretty easy question in the scheme of things.
Okay, well, I'm just trying to get you one.
And I think, you know, continuing with the psychoanalyst thing, it's like, well, you unpack the meaning of Iron Man probably being my favorite in the, you know, the comic universe. And I'm sure there's a lot of meaning behind that as well.
Oh, Katie, she's going to get onto this after the podcast.
She does listen to these, so I've got to be on good behaviour.
Well, then what's your favourite midnight snack?
Well, I'm going to say just last night my midnight snack was Greek yogurt. Jauna brand for a plug there. I don't know if you've had it before, but it's super thick. It's like
sweet.
No, it's not sweet.
Okay.
It's actually kind of sour, but it's thick like ice cream. It's a good Greek yogurt.
Okay, I'm a dairy-free person.
Oh well,
so
it's going to be lost on you. But for anyone else listening,
I know it's definitely thumbs up.
Yep.
So you're the CEO of an accounting firm.
Yep.
When did you realise that you wanted to work in the accounting industry?
It's a good question. There's a bit of a story behind that. And it kind of goes back to, I guess, my mid-teens. So I'd always been involved in business, you know, generally. But, you know, as a teenager, right, I had all of these varying sort of like side hustles and stuff like that. And I actually remember talking to my wife about this during the elections, right? Because we voted at Gilly Street Primary School,
yes,
right?
where my kids went.
Right. And they had all of the kids doing their sort of like, their bake sales and all of that sort of stuff. And I was just very impressed with the hustle. And I was thinking about like, well, that's really where it all began, was kind of like at my primary schools, you know, like bake sales and stuff like that, because it was basic business, right?
It is.
Because as kids, we got to pick what we were going to sell.
Yeah.
We got to pick how much we were going to sell it for. And then we were kind of in charge of making as much money as we could on the day, right? But yeah, this kind of permeated all through high school and whatnot. And I kind of got to this point, and look, I was making decent money as a teenager, but I got to this point that I was good at making money, you know, by age 19. I was good at making money, but not very good at keeping it.
Okay.
Right? Which was going to be a problem.
Probably not uncommon for 19-year-olds.
Yeah, right. You know, I could probably tell you where it all went now, but, you know, I could kind of extrapolate what that future was going to look like. And it's like, look, I need to sort this out, right? Because I don't know. And I wasn't, you know, keeping track of any of this, right? I just knew money had come in, but I'd never have any money by the end of the month. And I said, I need to get a handle on this if I want to be successful in business, right? And I was talking to a friend of mine from high school at the pub, and I remember this conversation quite explicitly. And she told me that she was going to go study. Because she had a gap year as well. I had like a gap 2 or 3 years because I dropped out of high school early. But she said that she was done with her gap year and she was going to get on the straight and narrow and go to university. Okay. And then we got to talking about what she was studying naturally, and she was telling me all about accounting and what accounting was and, you know, why that mattered. And at the, you know, concurrently at that same time, I was going through this kind of like, I got to, you know, fix my business, you know, I suppose stuff, right? And that was kind of like the missing link, right? And, you know, in hindsight, it was probably like a bit rash to kind of like take your biggest weakness in business and then go like enroll in a university degree to kind of plug that gap. But I mean, this was like pre-Google.
It's a pretty big commitment.
Yeah, I know it was, right? But yeah, that night after
there was no Google, so
there was, but it was like the old Google.
Yeah.
So I remember going home and my computer, remember these huge boxes and dial-up internet. I went on to Google. It might have been Ask Jeeves or something like that.
Yes.
And just went how to get into into university without high school, right? And that rabbit hole that I went down, that night basically I found a pathway that I could effectively buy my way into university through some bridging programs. And like literally within a couple of weeks, I was enrolled at university in an accounting degree.
That's so cool.
Yeah. So, and I feel like in hindsight, that wasn't really like a whim or anything like that. That was kind of like I needed to go through that process to kind of get there.
Yeah, but that's pretty entrepreneurial too, to like say you're a high school dropout and I'm going to figure out what I need to do to make this happen for the next stage of my business career.
And I think the important thing in terms of, well, why accounting was I think I learned pretty early on during my studies and my work that like, because I was always obsessed with business and it was always about business and it still is about business, right? But what I saw is like accounting is kind of like, I guess the articulation or the expression of business.
Yes.
And it's like, you know, if you had a kid that was obsessed with cars, let's say.
Yes.
Yeah. It'd be a natural extension for them to go learn how to be a mechanic, right? And I think if you've got a kid that's obsessed with business, the natural extension of that is to go be an accountant, right? Because the thing I discovered in public practice was that, you know, I got to play with hundreds of businesses, not just one, right? Same deal, you know, with the mechanic analogy. It's like every day there's a different car in the shop, right? You know, in public practice accounting, every week there's a different business that I'm kind of looking at. And I think that's the real attraction to this profession.
Yep. Well, moving on from graduating, you wrote an article a few years ago called The 6 Best Moves Early in My Accounting Career. So for those who haven't read it, can you take us through those 6 moves or broadly remember what they are?
I don't think I can remember them, you know, like in order, but I can recite, you know, some
what
that I know, absolutely. And I think the most important one, and I think this is especially useful for any young accountants that are listening, is about mentors, right? So this is the part of the story that I didn't get onto. Before I enrolled in university, or somewhere when I'd enrolled but hadn't started, I was working out of a gym in the CBD. And, you know, as you do, it was like, you know, saying my goodbyes to everyone. And there was a woman there who was probably about 6 or 7 years older than me. I can't really remember, but she was older than me. You could tell because she'd rock up in her suit and very fancy looking.
Serious.
Yeah, very serious.
Serious business person.
Yes, absolutely. And I was like, oh, you know, see you, Carly. I think this is probably the last you and I are, you know, ever going to see each other. And she's like, oh, why's that? It's like, oh, well, you know, I've enrolled in university. And she's like, oh, what are you studying? I'm like, oh, accounting. And then she rummages through her like bag and then she pulls out a card and she gives it to me and she says, call me in your first week. Yeah. Okay. And I look at it and it says, you know, Carly Ascott, you know, accountant or senior accountant or something like that. Right. And, you know, this is like the first time I'd ever seen like a real business card, I guess, in that professional context. And I'd always had a great deal of, I suppose, you know, respect / admiration for Carly because like you could tell, like, again, I'm not a big on like designer brands, but like, she just had this vibe about her that is like she was in charge, right?
Yeah, cool.
So I already had a lot of respect for her, but I never actually got so far as like, well, what do you do? You know, because I was a teenager and that didn't really matter at the time.
What did you do at the gym? Were you the receptionist?
No. I was a personal trainer.
Oh,
so
wow.
I was operating like a personal training business. Okay. And there was a place in the city that I, you know, saw most of my clients out of. And she was just a member at that gym. But you spend 40 hours a week there. You're going to get to know people, right? And especially Carly because her, I think then boyfriend / husband at the time was also a personal trainer from the gym, right? So we had that level of connection too. And anyway, I took her up on the advice and contacted her like after my first week. And like seriously, that first meeting, and there were several others after that, but she just like laid it all out. Like here's literally everything that you need to know, and what you need to do and how you need to do it, if you want to succeed in this profession. And in those meetings to follow, I learned so much from her and she absolutely shortcut my learning, my career trajectory and absolutely everything, right? And I've been a big believer in, I suppose, mentoring since and still sort of continue. Well, now that I'm a bit older, it's kind of give and receive, like back in a two-way street. And yeah, I think that relationship, made a huge difference, you know, career-wise, in terms of what I've been able to accomplish, I suppose, as a result of that, you know, and that continues to be the case. So I think that's probably the number one. There's a few other things, you know, like on that list. So one I was talking to my students about today was actually about like LinkedIn. And it seems kind of like cheesy or like trivial about LinkedIn, but I made all of my students sign up for LinkedIn accounts today, right? Because the very reason that I was actually there teaching them in the first place was because of LinkedIn, right? So my lecturer from like, I don't know, way back, right? The early noughties, LinkedIn was brand new back then, and I signed up sort of on a recommendation of a friend. But I'd routinely look up my lecturers and my tutors every class I had to see if they were on LinkedIn, right?
Yes.
And at that stage, not many were, but like the ones I did, at the end of the class, I added them and then wrote them a recommendation.
Yeah, nice.
And some of them would reciprocate, right? Because it was a new platform and everyone was just playing around. And that lecturer, he still remembers that, right? So I ended up teaching for him a couple of years ago. At UniSA. And then when he moved back to Adelaide, he contacted me maybe 6 months ago and was like, do you want to teach with me again? And I went, absolutely, time and a place and I'll be there, right? And that's just one example of like hundreds of them, right? That I can actually attribute directly to, me having a LinkedIn account in the first place and then me obviously doing the work associated with that.
Yeah, you
right?
actually do have to do the work.
Yeah,
so we'll pop a link to that article in the show notes and then people can read all of them. Accodex.
Yeah.
You're a founder?
Yes.
What was the motivation to start it?
Okay, so prior to that, I'd started an accounting practice, which was a pretty vanilla sort of, suburban accounting firm, which was back in sort of 2010, 2011.
On your own?
Well, with a friend of mine from high school, but he was 24 and didn't know what he was doing either.
Okay.
But, I'd spent, about 4 years in public practice and then 2 years in the corporate sector by the time I'd started my own thing.
Okay.
And the thing is, and again, this was from my interactions with Carly throughout this, was that I knew I was never going to be like a career accountant, right? For me, accounting was very much a means to an end, yeah?
You were always too entrepreneurial for that.
Correct, and this is why it was important during my early career that I would preference shifting departments to like an upward career sort of trajectory. So I would move from tax to audit, even if that came at the expense of a pay rise. Okay. So I could get that exposure to audit, and to tax and to business services and all of the other areas of like accounting, right? Which meant that during my 4 years there, I pretty much got to work with every single partner from my firm in almost every single area of like accounting practice, right? So when I finished my graduate diploma, I felt like I was in a pretty good sort of position.
Well-rounded.
Yeah, well-rounded, right? And, the last 2 years in the corporate sector working for a public company was more about like, well, let's see how the other side live, I guess.
The commerce side or commercial side.
And, it was important that I did that because I needed to disqualify that, okay, well, maybe let's just try sort of commerce before I sort of commit to starting up my own practice and doing all of that, right? Because I've always heard that life's greener on the,
always,
on the commerce industry side of things. And look, for all intents and purposes, it absolutely is, right? I think it pays higher. It's probably less stressful. And there's a whole myriad of things why.
And it's meaningful. Like I did the same thing. Yep. It's meaningful working with your client, one client that you know intimately, you know everything about
deep
them.
Impact.
You can have that.
And I think the other thing, because I just remembered your experiences in house counsel, like that. You're the only one with that skill set, within the company as well, or maybe of a handful, right? But when you're in accounting practice or legal practice, it's like, okay, well, you've got 50 lawyers in the office. Everyone's basically the same, right? Whereas in corporate sector, it's like you might be the only accountant, within 1,000 people.
So that's a bit of a double-edged sword as well, isn't it? Because you can feel very lonely being the only person with that skill set or one of a couple and don't have many to bounce ideas off of. But I think it's absolutely so valuable that you did that.
Yeah. And I needed to, because I just needed to kind of get that full sort of picture of like what accounting actually is before I made, life-altering decision. But for me, the end was always to go back into business, right? The thing is, in my mid-20s, I didn't know what that business was going to be, right?
Of course.
And, I did a lot of soul searching, back then. And ultimately just kept coming back to accounting, and, believe it or not, I'm just like, you know what, there's enough opportunities for innovation in accounting where I can have a good time in this profession, right? And then part of it as well was that I got tired of waiting, right? because I was obsessed about kind of like creating the next Microsoft or Google or whatever, right? And I'd spent like about a full year just kind of like sitting around waiting for an apple to fall on my head, and that was going to be it, right? And I just realized it's like I can't start a business like that. So, my backup plan is like, you know what? I'm going to go into accounting. I'm going to start an accounting firm. Yeah. I've got enough opportunity to innovate in there. Plus, it'll be a good way to pass the time while I'm waiting for the apple to fall on my head.
Correct.
Right?
It's going to happen someday.
Yeah. And from my perspective, the apple landing on my head was Accodex. Yeah. It was this like market network business model, and it was the technology that actually underpins that, plus the democratization of business intelligence. The amalgamation of those things is something, in my opinion and others, I would say, is something quite powerful in terms of its impact, not just on the accounting profession, I think, but I think in broader business world, in terms of the impact of what we're working on. And I'm in a point now with Accodex where it's like, I'm very comfortable with the notion of like working here for the next sort of 30 or 40 years of my life because of the nature of what we're working on. Whereas if I were in accounting practice, I may not have been able to say that.
Yes.
Yeah. That being said, accounting practice is a great, business and career. Yeah.
And changing as well.
It is, which is the exhausting part. But like accounting practices, it's like, it's good and it's comfortable and it's safe and it's conservative. But I had this conversation with my business partner, Marcus, and we were in our late 20s, and it was along the lines of, well, this is fun. We're making good money. Life's good. Life's pretty easy. What do you want to do? Do you want to do this for the next 30 years or do you want to swing for the fences? Yeah. And, he had the same conclusion that I did, whereas like, we're in our 20s. We can absorb the risk. Let's just swing for the fences.
Got a lot of working life ahead of us.
Let's just swing for the fences and see what happens, and the last 3 years, that's basically been the product of that decision.
So cool. So you're known as the Accounting Futurist. What does that mean?
That means quite simply that I'm in the business of predicting the future of the accounting profession, period. We got lucky in my practice sort of 7-8 years ago, right? Where I backed the cloud, right? So we had a look at the competitive landscape in terms of accounting software. We saw this sketchy New Zealand startup called Xero, yeah, which was a pretty average product back
at
then,
the time,
right? Yeah, like 8 years ago. But it had a good trajectory. We liked the team's enthusiasm and philosophy, particularly this one thing that I keep coming back to called single ledger theory. Okay. Yeah. And the implications that actually had from, I guess, a changing everything perspective in accounting. So I understood the thesis. I liked the team and the trajectory that they were going. And we kind of just went all chips in on Xero back then. And it was the right decision, and it afforded us a lot of growth and a lot of competitive advantage. And I kind of got to this point, in my late 20s where I'm like, if I can do this consistently, over time at scale and make business and investment decisions based on my theories about the future of just the accounting profession, then I'm going to make a lot of money. Because when I started like stumping for Xero and saying that cloud accounting was completely going to transform the face of accounting worldwide 8 years ago, people thought I was nuts.
Crazy.
Yeah. Now that is a mainstream opinion. That's just consensus, right?
So what are you saying now that people say that you're nuts?
There's a few things. There are a few things. So Accodex is predicated on a hypothesis around the future of the labor market, which, your listeners can Google the 1099 economy or like the gig economy, et cetera, et cetera. I have this belief that millennials and younger, for all intents and purposes, are moving away from this traditional 9-to-5 office environment. They are moving away from this, I have one job for 40 years or one career, one company for 40 years. I think the norm in 10 years' time is going to be, I have 2 or 3 jobs. I work, part at home, part remotely, part from airport lounges, part from, libraries, offices, wherever. Yeah. Like the whole point is I can work wherever. Flexibly. Yeah. And then I think the other thing is that I can work whenever. Yeah. So there's this departure from the 9 to 5.
Definitely.
So that's something that's sort of where my head's at. But most people don't think that's completely crazy. I think the other
because
thing,
they're seeing it emerge.
yeah, they're seeing that, and I think the tail of that's pretty long, and you can sort of see that and predict that. So when I talk about that, people are like, yeah, that's reasonable. But I think it's the investment thesis around that. I think the big ones that people have been like dismissing are probably around my views of the world insofar as blockchain's concerned, and then I suppose the extension from that, how blockchain interacts with artificial intelligence, and I suppose the steps and the progressions through there. So my current belief is that artificial intelligence is basically hype. Yeah, it's a good marketing buzz.
Okay.
Blockchain, which is the less sexy sort of technology at the moment, you need blockchain technology to basically be properly codified and just part of the norm before we can actually consider artificial intelligence.
Okay.
We just need to. And I think if you think about the early internet, and I'm talking like circa 2000-ish, right? For us, the internet isn't technology anymore. It's not something that we think about. It's just something that is, right? And I think blockchain's probably the same sort of thing, that in 10, 20 years' time,
it's just gonna be normal.
it's just like it is what it is. We probably won't even call it a thing, right? Nobody calls the internet the internet. They just call it, it, right? Because we're just using it all the time. Nobody thinks about it. Because I remember, I'm old enough to remember when email was a big deal. People like,
you can save money on a stamp,
right? And I think when you kind of extrapolate that and go, yeah, like blockchain is going to be the same thing.
Yes.
So I'm saying to accountants that they don't need to become experts in it, but they need to understand it. One, from a client's perspective, because I think it is going to impact their clients, and two, from their perspective as a practitioner's perspective, because it will impact the profession as a whole. And because this kind of intersects with the bull market of 2017, there was a lot of, what do they call it? Tulip mania, because it was a total insane bull market, with no rationality whatsoever. But so was the tech bubble in 2000, right? Where you had companies that actually had nothing inside them, listing on the NASDAQ for like, billions of dollars. What happened in 2017 insofar as crypto assets and blockchain was concerned was no different, right? And that's actually just
a bubble.
Yeah, it's a natural manifestation of the markets, right? And it's just going to happen on a shorter time continuum because back in 2000, how you'd find out about these sketchy, tech companies to invest in on the NASDAQ was through friends of yours in New York or something like that, or reading about it in the paper. Yeah. The crypto bubble being bootstrapped off the back of the internet as a communication platform meant that everything happened much faster and louder and bigger and more dramatically, right? But that does not strip away from the importance of the underlying technology. And that's my current view of the world.
So you talk about the possibility of mass disruption in the accounting industry and called it the account apocalypse.
I did.
It sounds scary.
Yep. Yeah, it was a little clickbaity.
Well, okay. So is there anything that you're predicting in that you haven't talked about yet?
So we've talked about the change in labor dynamics. We've talked about the change in technology. There's a few sort of intersecting sort of components around that. And the one that I haven't talked about is globalization and the impact there. And this is for all businesses and not just accounting, right? 20 years ago, it would have been absolutely unheard of for an Australian accounting firm to be servicing clients in Europe or in the United States.
Or have team members in the Philippines.
Exactly. Or have team members anywhere other than their local office, right?
Yeah.
But when you mix this globalization, because when globalization intersects with technology and with this changing labor dynamic, that goes from being unheard of to being completely normal and like the norm, right? So my belief when it comes to globalization is that firms probably won't even have like a national identity. They will probably be comprised of like, a myriad of different people from a myriad of different countries, which is like, well, the best people that believe in this project that are working on this project, right? And then I think by virtue of that, the customers and the clients are going to be international as well. It's like, well, whoever wants to buy this product. And I think the thing that I've seen firsthand in practice is you've got these like 20-year-old kids who are starting these like e-commerce or .com companies, and their clients are evenly distributed throughout the world from day one, right? And they have questions concerning some of the most complex international tax matters.
Same thing happens with us.
Yeah, right. For a company that's doing less than $100,000 in revenue, right? And that, yes, it's anomalous, but eventually that's going to become the norm, right? So yeah, that's probably the one thing that I didn't touch on in that account apocalypse model.
Do you have a routine that you do every day to motivate yourself?
I wouldn't say necessarily to motivate myself, but to kind of start the day, right? I was actually talking to my mum about this on the weekend, that it's like, my mornings pretty much happen on autopilot, which I think is a good thing. Yeah. And a lot of that is just centered around, I guess, routines and doing the right thing. And I'm quite fortunate that my son is kind of the anchor point of those routines.
Yes.
And I'm sure you've had this with your kids as well, where it's like, if you wake up after the kids wake up, your day's just gone.
Crisis.
And I'm not even talking morning, I'm talking just right off your entire day, yeah? And I learned this pretty early on, right, as a father, that it's like, I need to get up before the kids do.
Got to get ahead of the game.
Correct, right? Which is what I do. And it absolutely sets me up for the day. And I do feel like I'm on autopilot, like for the first hour or so before I actually leave the house. So a lot of that's concerned around food first and foremost.
Good. Even blood sugar.
I guess, but like I've never been as big on breakfast as I have been since I had my son. So because it's like you're feeding him, and it's like this thing where it's like, well, if you wouldn't eat it, if you wouldn't feed it to your son or to your kids, why are you eating it, right?
It's a big one.
So yeah, breakfast is a pretty big deal in our house. And yeah, I'm A-okay with that. Exercise is a big deal in our house, like first thing in the morning as well. And I guess just getting on top of the day in terms of like, what are you doing, and when are you doing it and all of that sort of stuff. And I think, the conversations in the morning around the breakfast table, I think are important now and are going to become like of increasing importance.
As he gets better at and more conversational.
Exactly. So, as he gets older and we have more kids, we're going to have that conversation. And I think for us, breakfast is probably going to be a more important meal than dinner. But I mean, ask me again in sort of 10 years' time. But I think it's important for us to have that conversation around the table in the morning, going like,
set the day up, right?
What are you going to do? What do you want to get out of this day and that sort of thing.
So what do you do to unwind or defrag?
That's something that I really need to work on, right? But something that I've been experimenting in is something I read online called bookends. Is basically this idea that you end your day the same way you started your day, but in reverse, right? So how like when you wake up in the morning, it's like, you shower and you brush your teeth and you do a workout and then you get into like breakfast and stuff like that. Yeah. It's like doing that, but in reverse, right? So that, you just
you set your body for wind down.
Yeah, so you have dinner
and then for wind up, and then you set it down.
You have dinner and then you basically like work backward from there, so that the last thing you do is like climbing into bed, which is the same way you started the day, climbing out of bed, right? And I think that's a good way to kind of do this. But I think you'd know this and your listeners would, that it's like the day can disintegrate very easily, and it's like if I miss dinner, then everything just kind of like everything. Yeah, basically. So if I get home at like 9 or 10 p.m. at night, it's like good luck unwinding properly. Yeah. And I think that problem compounds on itself. Yeah. Because it's like, okay, if it still takes you 3 hours to unwind and you've just gotten home at 10 p.m., you're not getting to sleep until 1 o'clock.
True.
Yeah. And if you're trying to wake up at 5 so that you can beat your kids in the morning.
Getting up.
How about that? Beat your kids in the morning. Beat your kids awake in the morning. Well, you got to be up at 5, which means you're either going to sleep in and destroy your next day, or you're going to be running on 4 hours sleep.
You've got to be so in control of the routine.
And I think, like that's probably the hardest part for me is like the nighttime routine, because I really do need to start sort of 6 p.m. And I need to start like, unwinding, because I don't know about you, but I can't do that in an hour. I need 3 hours of just like, gradually, off ramping before I can actually get to sleep properly. So I can't give you any pointers on that one. But except for that bookends idea, I've tried that and I like that. It's just whether or not you can
practically.
actually consistently do that is a completely different proposition.
Thank you so much for coming in today to the
worries.
studio. It's been fun.
Has been. Thanks.
Thanks for tuning in to the podcast today. If you're still listening, you can find the show notes on our website, ulegal.com.au. You're welcome to go ahead and subscribe, leave a review, and share the podcast with anyone that you think might benefit from it, anyone that you think is open to helping us create a world with a purpose that's higher than profit. If you're an accountant on purpose, feel free to find our Facebook page and join our community.